No.
Hey, is there spread though? Yeah, you want it? No. You, but it's not spread. I'm not.
It's always amazed me how the NIV gained prominence in the church. Because
Yeah.
it really isn't. There's a lot of problems with that translation. For some reason, it became the popular brand.
They should always take that and put a little gold plate over it and put a different name on it.
Yeah.
Sure. For scratch gone. How you doing, Miss Cindy? I'm fine. A little cold. I know. Don't you just hate it?
All right. This
Yes,
time
I'm
we're
glad
going
to
to
see
have
it.
a
You
here.
know, we really made it through
Some others
December.
might show up. But, so you got two pieces of information, or two packets. One is a single sheet, the other's 3 pages, okay? Everything's front and back, okay? So on the first one, I think this will carry us over for a couple Sundays. I could be wrong, but the first one, look at the seals, trumpets, and bowls. It's the one that's setting horizontally, or centered horizontally. So I made this for you, so you can refer to this. When we get to the trumpets and the bowls, you're going to start to see a lot of similarities, similar plagues and things like that going on. Okay, so there's that information there, and I kind of underlined some things that were similar, or made them bold to help you see the similarities, and also where some of the imagery is coming from. Okay, and on the back is just a representation of kind of the way the seals and the trumpets and the bowls work. So it starts off with the seals, and then it cycles, goes to the trumpets, and intensifies. And then goes to the bowls and does the same thing. So it's a cycling repetition, except it gets more vivid and intense as it goes. Okay? All right. Start off with a little quiz. Yeah, okay. Go ahead. Okay, so review real quick.
We'll just skip that.
Sit quick.
Does the term Antichrist appear in Revelation?
No,
Where's it appear?
it doesn't.
Yeah, 1 John, 2 John. So we probably shouldn't put it there, right? Not there. Very good. What type of writing is used in Revelation?
Apocalyptic.
Apocalyptic. Very good. You got
You're a good student. Yeah.
Take that off.
Teacher's
Ron.
pet. Suck up.
Second that burner.
Just because you had it.
Apocalyptic. Okay, so it's a special type of writing, and we need to pay attention to it, and we need to respect it, and we need to use certain guidelines. Okay, so we're looking for symbols. We're looking at big picture concepts. It would have been a lot better if John was a painter, because he's really painting us pictures with words instead of brush strokes. So he has these vivid images, and they're all collecting together to give us a picture of something, okay? Also, it has a very pessimistic worldview, meaning that the things are going horribly wrong, and they're asking for God's justice to intervene. What is the name of the area where the 7 churches are located? Asia Minor. What is the modern day reference? Turkey. Very good. What word used in Revelation 4 and 5, chapters we looked at last week? And it appears in Revelation also, but it's predominantly in 4 and 5, which depicts royalty, power, and authority. Throne. Very good. So we need to remember that. Who sits on the throne? Who sits on the throne in 4 and 5?
Jesus.
Or God. Yeah, God sits on the throne. So he's the one with the royalty, power, and authority. Okay, you go to the next slide. What's the word that occurs mostly in Revelation? In fact, it's predominantly there in Revelation in comparison to the rest of the New Testament, and presents encouragement and confidence for Christians. Nikao wasn't me. victory, be victorious. So victory.
We're gonna get Nike shoes.
Yeah, victory. So victory is an important word. And it applies to Christians. Okay? So we'll be victorious. What happens when an interpreter ignores historical information about Revelation?
You get all these predictions that apply to current
Yeah.
situation.
You get these ideas that are not very good. Let's put it that way. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the message of Revelation, it cycles and intensifies. Okay, so we're going to remember that. Cycling, intensify. So we're going to see repetitive ideas presented. We should look for repetition. And a similar idea coming up. So when we get started on the seals, excuse me for a second, I got to take one first. So when we get started on the seals, we're going to see a picture of persecution of some sort, or something terrible going on that's happening to Christians. Okay? Christians will be pleading for God's intervention, for justice. God will provide some type of judgment. Okay, so this idea just cycles. And it gets intense, intensifies as it goes. So we're going to be looking at Revelation 6. So if you got your packet here, that's fine, just leave it there, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let me talk about reading through Revelation real quick, okay? Just to rehash some ideas. And I know you guys have heard this, but please bear with me because repetition is a great model of teaching. So, when we talk about reading through Revelation, people will say, do we read it literally or some other way or whatever? Truthfully, I don't know. In fact, when people say that about the Bible, I really don't know what their end goal is. Sometimes it almost seems like someone says, I read literally, implying you don't, meaning I'm a better Christian than you, that kind of idea. It seems like a lot of times. We read the information according to the way the author presents it. So you don't read Psalms the same way you read Genesis. You read them differently. You don't read Romans the same way you read Revelation. You read them differently. There are certain guidelines that we have to use, okay? So when we're looking at some of these writings like Psalms and prophetic writings, Old Testament prophetic writings, Revelation, they present lots of pictures to us, word pictures, and we don't take them literally. We don't think because the psalmist says that the Lord is a rock, that we're going to see a rock when we get to heaven. Or we don't think because God says, I'll protect you under the shadow of my wing, that we think God's a big bird. Or when we come to Revelation 4 and 5 and it says the Lamb was at the center of the throne room, and we know it's talking about Jesus, we don't think Jesus is a physical lamb. Okay? So we have to read according to the author's intent. Big picture focus, we're looking for the big picture, okay? And it's fun to get stuck in the little details. There's all kinds of information probably that somebody can unearth about that, dig up. But if we focus too much on the little details and get lose our track of looking at the big picture, we're going to miss what's going on in Revelation. So we really need to look at the big picture. It's like looking at a painting. You don't study just individual colors and brush strokes. You look at the whole painting. That's what we need to do with Revelation. Symbolism, we've got to appreciate symbolism, and we're going to locate that symbolism most of the time in the Old Testament. Okay? So I'm actually on the page that says Revelation 6, 4, and 8 at the top, if you guys are wondering. Repetition. So you're going to hear numbers repeated over and over. 4, 12, 7, 2. Pay attention to those numbers. They mean something, okay? So pay attention to those. They're significant. So just stop for a moment and think about it. Colors. White is a repeated color. And there are others too. So just take notice of those. Or sayings or concepts if they're repeated. And then the apocalyptic features that I talked about, the cycling idea. So let's look at chapter 6 now. If you have your Bibles, open up to Revelation 6. We're going to look at what's going on there. Okay, so we're thinking about big concept here. If you looked at this picture, who is this person? Uncle Sam. Is he real? What does it mean? What is he about?
Symbol of our government.
Symbol for government. What else? Freedom.
Recruiter.
Recruiter. Yeah, because you're in the Army. So there's a lot of things going on with this image, right? It's just not a guy that sells ice cream on the 4th of July. There's much more to it, okay? Go to the next one.
Patriotism.
Oh, this guy. Who's this?
It's not good there.
What do we think about when we see him?
Forest fire.
Is he a real guy? Is there a bear out there that talks? No. Well, in the commercials, he's always worried about forest fires. We probably think about environmental issues, right, when we think of Smokey the Bear. Maybe you even think about policemen. I don't know. You had CB radios a long time ago. So there's other things going on there. It's more than just a figure with a hat on. There's a concept behind it. Who can you guess this next one? You guys know who that person is?
Mother Nature.
Mother Nature. How do you know that?
But just, it's a, our flower child won.
You remember the commercial, the margarine commercial? That's not butter. You tried to fool Mother Nature. Yeah, that's Mother Nature. She has the wreath in her hair, the bright or the sunny, bright dress or whatever. So, picture of, pagan picture actually, but it's a picture of earthliness or something, okay? So we need to be thinking about big concepts when we look at these horses too, okay? So now go to the next slide. Okay, so here's our horses. White, red, black, pale green. So what we want to do here is we want to identify what's going on with these riders. So I'm going to walk you through like a little test case, how we're going to do this, okay? So when we're looking at the Bible, we need to investigate. That's just the way it is. We're removed from the text over a span of time historically. We're removed linguistically. They're using a different language. We're removed culturally. It was a different culture. So we have to find out things about the history, the language, the culture, so on and so on, in order for us to have a good idea of what's going on. So the way we want to begin is when you're looking at this and you're wondering about the identity of the rider on the white horse, the first thing to do is just let the text speak. So what does the text tell us? Well, it says the horse is white. It says the rider has a bow. It says the rider has a crown. But not only that, it was given to him. That's important. Where did it come from? It was given to him. And the rider is victorious. So we have that information from the text itself. Okay? So if you turn your page over, so we have the color white. So we want to investigate the color white. So please bear with me, okay? So this is what we're going to do, if you guys don't mind. I'm going to separate some text out, if you guys don't care. 2 or 3 of you take some text, and if you would talk about it, that would be, I appreciate that a lot. So, Rhonda and Eli, you take the first two, 114 and 217. And then next two, take chapter 3, verses 4, 5, and do 18 too. Please. Just look at it and read it. Cindy and Ed, if you could do 4, 4 and 6, 2. Yeah, that'd be good. 6, 6, 2. Stella, if you could do 6, 11. 7, 6, chapter 6, verse 11. 7, verse 9. 7, verse 9. 7, verse 13. Jan, 14, 14. 19, 11. Dad, 19, 14. You guys can do those, 19, 14. You do 20, 11. So what I want to do is I want to read that text. Hello. And see what we can discover about white. These are all the places where white appears in Revelation. Okay, so if we want to know what's going on with white, we need to start studying what's going on with Revelation with white in that text. page 2. So just look at the text, read it, try to figure out what's going on with white there. Does it stand for something? Is it helping out in some way? Does it give you a better picture of something? Everybody ready? Don't overthink it. Okay, let's start with 114. You got that 114, 217. So give us a little background on the text. What's going on? This is the picture of Jesus, right?
The first one is,
Yeah, okay. So Jesus appeared to John. So where does white appear?
His hair.
His hair is white. White robe. What do you think? Isn't it white robe?
He just has long robe. Long robe.
He has white hair, so probably wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll probably have a picture of wisdom there. White hair, old age, wisdom. Okay.
Not necessarily so.
217. 217, what'd you find?
White stone.
White stone, which is kind of strange.
Almost like,
We want a clean slate, a new, it says new, a secret.
I'll give you a white stone. Probably something to do with some kind of judgment of innocence or something like that. So at a trial, they may have given white stones out. A juror, if they voted a certain way, they'd give a colored stone out. And white was probably a stone that declared innocence. Something like
what's
that.
it mean though by a new name written on a stone that no one knows except the ones who see it?
Because people thought at that time if you knew somebody's name, especially a god, then you had power over that god. So it may have something to do with that kind of concept. Like, I'll write a name that nobody knows, declaring you to be victorious, and no one will know it, so they can't take it away from you, that kind of idea or something. Okay, very good. Chapter 3, 4, and 5. 3 verses 4. So what did you guys find out about white?
That they shall walk with me in white.
Okay. And what precedes that? What were their clothes before that?
Defiled garments.
Okay, so they had defiled garments, and then after that, they're going to change, and they're going to be dressed in white. So what do you think that kind of means?
But if they're worthy now.
Yeah, worthy or purity, right? They've been purified to some degree. Verse 5 is kind of the same, right? Did you guys have another?
Yeah, we had
18?
18.
Okay, what did you find out in 18?
Well, it just says that you may be rich in white garments. And that the shame of the nakedness may be revealed.
Okay. Well, he starts off and says that they're basically in a bad state, wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. I counsel you to buy for me gold, from Jesus that is. Then you can become rich. Obviously, he's not talking about buying gold, but
Right.
receiving something from Jesus. And then you can become rich. They were materially rich, but he says they're actually poor. So it has some kind of spiritual idea with them buying from him. And then he says he'll give them white clothes to wear, right?
Right.
So the church in Laodicea is in bad shape. Their eyes are not on Christ. Clothes, in that instance also, what do you think that probably signifies? Purity.
Yeah.
Okay,
We had
very
pure
good.
and worthy again.
4-4, right? What'd you guys find out?
24 thrones with 24 elders on them.
Okay, and they were dressed in white.
In white.
What do you think that signifies? They're right with God.
Justice,
Well,
confidence,
yeah, well, keep going. They're right there with God. What would that? They're probably pure people, right?
holy.
Pure, yeah, holy. Okay, so purity, that kind of idea. Did you guys have 6-2 also? Okay, don't worry about that one. That's what we're going to talk about. That's the horse. Okay, Stella, enlighten us.
Okay,
6:11.
that's talking about the people who were killed for their faith. And
Okay.
they're waiting under the altar and they're complaining, how much longer are we going to have to wait
Right.
here? And they were given white
White
robes
robes.
and told to wait a little longer. I think of white as being purity,
Okay, very good.
as in white wedding gowns used
Yeah.
to indicate purity
Purity.
or virginity.
How did they die? What did they die?
They were killed for their faith.
Right, exactly. So, they were killed because of the Word of God. So, okay, Donna, you had 7-9, right?
Yes, uh-huh.
What'd you find out?
It was a multitude of people representing several different nations that were
Okay.
all dressed in white robes before God.
Okay, so since they're with God, we probably think of white as being a sense of
Yeah.
what? Purity. Okay, yeah, very good. Okay, next, verse 13. We have the elders again.
Yes. Who are these arrayed in white robes and where did they come from?
Yeah. So he's talking about the great multitude. So we've already identified what that meant before. So it's probably talking about purity again, right? Okay, very good. 14:14.
Okay, and we're talking about a white cloud,
Okay.
and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man.
Okay. So we really don't get a whole lot from it.
No.
So white cloud. So 19:11.
And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat upon it is called Faithful, True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. This is righteousness. This is the Lamb again, but it doesn't call him the Lamb this time. He is the one who is faithful and true.
Yeah, it's presenting Jesus as a warrior.
Uh-huh.
That's a very important passage for our chapter 6. So you get to take over the class and teach us from now on. So. All right, Dad. You guys had verse 14 or?
Right, the armies of heaven were on white horses, and they were all dressed in white.
White. Yeah, and so, yeah, and clean. So, and they're with the heavenly warrior, right? And they're an army of heaven. So, you think white means? What do you think white means there?
I mean, it's purity.
Purity.
Their sins are not there. These are the people of God.
Yeah. So. Okay, and 2011.
Yeah, the white throne, and I enlisted Melinda since she's
Okay.
down there, so any questions
She's-
you direct.
she's very It probably does, yeah. I mean, you're probably right about that. Who's sitting on the throne? And God.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
yeah.
So it could just be a sign of beauty, like a white throne has some kind of beauty idea. It could also be wisdom, possibly purity, since it's judgment. We don't know a whole lot from it, but the throne is described as being white. So, as we've discussed this, what seems to be a common idea that keeps coming up about white in Revelation?
Purity.
Purity. Okay. So, it's safe for us when we're looking at chapter 6, verse 2, when it talks about this rider on the white horse having a sense of purity. And then also tying in with 19:11, which we definitely have a picture of Christ. It probably seems best for us to try to pull these images together. Okay? Let the Bible interpret itself. So, I'm not saying it is Christ, but it's associated. Is the way I would go with this, okay? So, just stop there. We don't want to make any conclusions yet. We just want to, or come to a conclusion yet. We want to keep on going. So, the rider also has a bow. Okay? There's the word bow doesn't show up anywhere else in Revelation. But we do have something very similar in chapter 4. Do you guys remember a type of bow that was around the throne of God? A rainbow. Okay, so let me talk about rainbow for a second. Ancient people, they thought of a rainbow, when you look at the Genesis story anyway, okay, so the rainbow is provided, and it's a promise, right, that God will not flood the earth again. Well, we term it as rainbow because we know that it shows in the sky after rain, but ancient people didn't think that way. They thought of it actually as a bow. So when you're thinking about the Revelation or the Genesis story and the flood, we're thinking about God's wrath, and they would have depicted that as a weapon of some sort being used against the wickedness of humanity. So when God sets his bow, when you set the bow with the curved side up, that meant basically that he was not going to use it for warfare anymore. He was going to pause. Okay? The word that's used for bow in chapter 6 in the Greek is the same word that's used in Genesis chapter 9 in the Greek version of the Old Testament. Okay? They use a different word in chapter 4, but the theme is still the same. Okay? So we still have this bow idea. Not a whole lot there, but we may find some type of association with judgment, associated with God, that kind of idea. So we don't get a lot there from the text. But historically, there's some interesting information about this bow. Can you back out of this for a second?
Yeah.
Go down to that Microsoft Word document. Okay, so where the dark purple line goes around, that's the Roman Empire. So it basically hugged the Mediterranean Sea. East, in this area and beyond, but you start going this way, you're running into, it'd be modern day Iraq and so forth, but that's the old Babylonian Empire. So there was a people group that lived in this area, and they had a great empire also. We don't hear about it because when we grow up, we only study Western civilization. We don't study Eastern civilization. But there was a great empire over here called the Parthian Empire. And Rome could never conquer these people. And the Parthians were known as great cavalrymen and archers. And it's even legendary that they could actually shoot backwards as they were riding. They could turn around and shoot. Rome could never defeat those people. Okay? They were cavalrymen and archers. Okay? So now you can back out of that. So let's see what we have so far. We have white. Seems to be the idea of purity. We have this bow image, which the people of that time would have understood about Parthia, especially people in the Palestine area, Jewish descent. They would have known because these people weren't very far away from them. So let's go to our next thing. Let's talk about the crown. I'm not going to go through every spot on crown, okay? You guys can do that on your own, okay? But I put all of them down there so you can go through and do it. So what we do is you start identifying everywhere where crown is at in Revelation. Now you can do this with a concordance, or what you can do, and I know it's a slower way, you can read all the way through Revelation and just start writing down where you see these things appear when you start seeing this repetition. Okay? Oh, something else that might interest you guys. Do you guys know anybody by the name of Steve? Do you guys have a relative or friend named Steve? Anybody know Steve? Mm-hmm. The word for crown in Greek is Stephanos. So if you know someone named Stephen, that's a person whose name basically means crown.
He's not here tonight.
So.
He'd get the big head anyway.
Okay, so we would go through and we'd find out everywhere where crown appears. And most of the time, where we see crown, it's denoting some kind of authority or importance. Or it could be denoting victory or reward. Something to that effect. The only place it's not is in chapter 9, verse 7. except in that grammatical construction we have a simile. A simile is where you use the word either as or like, and you're providing a comparison. So it's saying this person has something that looks like a crown, but really isn't a crown. So we can knock that one off. But everywhere else it's talking about some kind of authority or power or victory or reward. Okay, so probably this idea of authority probably fits best. And there's special wording there in 6:2 that this crown was given to the rider. So remember that also, okay? And then the last thing is victory. There are two occurrences. It talks about he'll be a conqueror and he'll go out and conquer. That's the same word for victory that we've been talking about, Nikao. Okay, so what we have is we have a white rider on a white horse, purity, rider with a bow, an unconquerable foe. We have a rider who has a crown, authority. Not only was that, but he was given to him. Who gave Jesus authority? God, the Father. God, Jesus says it in Matthew 28. I was given the kingdom by God. I have authority over all the kingdom of heaven and earth. Paul makes the same argument in Philippians chapter 2. He was obedient unto death, and even unto death he was obedient, and therefore God gave him a name that's above every other name. That every knee should bow at the sounding of his name, or before him. Okay, and then we have one that's victorious. Okay, now it could be a picture of Christ. We can say, well, it's just a picture of Christ. But I think there's probably a better idea here. I think it's probably a picture of a concept of the gospel, the message about Christ going out into the world. Okay, so as these horrible things are going on, the message is still going to be preached by people. People are going to accept it. It won't be stopped. And it will conquer. It will be victorious. So the gospel message will continue to go out. And it did. It wasn't stopped. And one of the most ironic things that you could ever imagine, wherever the church is persecuted, it grows. Where the church is not persecuted, it falters. So, something to think about. So I think that the rider on the white horse is the gospel. Now, of course, people could disagree, but I think we're probably pretty close here. And what all we've done is we've taken data. We've looked at the textual information. This is what we have. Then we just started walking through Revelation. So we looked at white, and I talked about crown a little bit, and gave you a little bit of historical information about the bow. But you could find these things out if you searched a little bit or talked to someone. And then with the previous information I've given you about your translation may translate part of that as conqueror, and the one who conquers. The word that's used there is the Nikao. Again, it's about being victorious. So we have a victor here. Okay, somebody who is victorious. So it seems to be presenting this idea of however you want to look at it. The message of Christ going out, the gospel going out, but that's probably what's going on. Let's walk through the red horse. So our textual information we have, the author provides us, is that this rider on the red horse was given power to take peace. Okay? It will cause, instigate people to kill one another. And he's given a great sword. The color red of itself doesn't help us too much. It only appears one other time in Revelation. It describes the dragon, chapter 12, a red dragon. So that really doesn't help us much. Except there is a small association there with, we'd say, evil. The act of killing in itself, the verb that's used there, is used several times in Revelation. So if you turn over to chapter 3. 4 times that verb about killing there is used in the reference to Christ, the one who was slain. 3 times it's used about Christians who've been slain because of the Word of God, because of the testimony, because of Christ, so forth and so on. 1 time it's used in reference to the beast, which seems to be a play on Christ's death. A sarcastic connection there, a parody. Okay? So, this rider's not named, even though everybody always wants to call this rider what? War, right? It's not named. We would say this is the rider of war, but it's never named in the text. So if we think about it conceptually, it's probably an idea of persecution. And last week I read those documents to you that we know there was persecution going on at that time. We have a letter, let me remind you, we have a letter from a governor who ruled in northern Turkey, an area called Bithynia, and he wrote a letter back to Trajan, who was the emperor of Rome in the early 1st century. And what's important about this is that it's very close to what's going on in Revelation as far as time-wise. It could only be at the most 20 years. It could be as close as 10 years. So it's very close historically. But also in this letter, Pliny talks about people who had recanted their faith 20 years earlier in the time of Domitian. And they recanted it because of a persecution that was going on. So that puts us in a time frame historically, from a historical source that talks about persecution at that time. Then we also have another person who wrote 300 years later who's retelling church history, Eusebius. And he talks about Domitian persecuting Christians and then coming to a point where he stopped doing it. Even though he loathed the Christians, he stopped doing it. So we have two sources that are well known that talk about persecution that's going on within this time. So I propose that the rider on the red horse is talking about persecution against Christians. That will happen. And did happen. John right now is on the island because of the Word of God, and he says that I'm also a member or a co-sufferer. Well, co-participant would be a better idea within this tribulation that we're all going through. Black horse. Well, let me stop there if you guys have any questions or anything. Stop real quick. I don't want to be discouraging, but it's probably impossible for us to say 100% certain that this means this or this means this. We just don't have that. We have to dig. The more we dig, the more we find out. So we can come up with some very logical, educated guesses that we would think probably fit really, really well. We have to piece things together. Any question, it doesn't matter. There's not a bad question. You can ask me, how are you doing this again? Where you come up with this stuff? I'm not getting it. It's no big deal. It's my fault if you're not getting it.
It said the only other place the red was used was for the dragon. Does that have a connotation other than the fact that he might just be evil?
It just says the dragon's red. We know the dragon wars against a woman in the picture there in Revelation 12, which seems to be a representation of God's people in the Old Testament and then going into the New Testament. So Israel is often, well, sometimes Israel is given like a feminine quality, meaning like a woman, like a bride of God. In the New Testament, the church is often referenced to as the bride of Christ. So it has this feminine characteristic.
I take it as the red horse as being God, and he's warring against evil.
Well, yeah, you could, but it seems like we're talking about persecution here, and the judgment doesn't come until later, until the fifth seal, or the sixth seal. I'm sorry, sixth seal. So,
But I don't take the red horse as being evil. Do you?
I take it as being the persecution against the church.
I take it persecution.
Why would it take peace away from people?
Well, it could be a false peace.
Well, it doesn't say that, though. It just says it was given power to take peace away.
Yeah. But the four horses are judgment, aren't they?
Well, the first one's not. It seems like it's a gospel. But judgment, these things are going to happen. God allows these things to happen.
Allowing this red horse to
Yeah.
And you think, and I'm thinking that the peace is not that the whole earth is evil. God is taking that peace away from you. I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure I am. But
Well, I mean, it's vague. It just says he's going to take peace away from the people. They'll start killing one another. Interesting, that verb that's used there as far as the killing, only it appears in Revelation it's always talking about Christians or something associated with Christ. Christ is killed or Christians are killed. So that's why I'm thinking it probably has some kind of a persecution idea also. I jumped a little bit ahead. You guys might be wondering where these horses come from, why they're different colors and so forth. So let's just pause right here in between the red and the black. We'll come back to the black. But let's turn to Zechariah chapter 6 in your Old Testament. Zechariah chapter 6. One of the later prophets. So Zechariah will be towards the end of your Old Testament. So Zechariah 6, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 8.
What was the one more time? Zechariah what?
Zechariah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. So John picks up on these images from Zechariah. He doesn't use them with the same purpose, but the images of these different colored horses come from here. So text says, I looked up again, and there before me were 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second black, the third this white color or pale, the fourth dappled, must have been some kind of spotted, I don't know. All of them powerful. And he goes on and he says, I asked the angel who was speaking to me, what are these, my Lord? And then he goes on and he talks about these horses just going out into the world as the presence of God goes out. Probably in reference to bringing the Jewish people back from captivity, exile. Even though this is after the exile, it seems to be that's what it's talking about, because in chapter 5 it's talking about Babylon. So John is not using that image in that way, though. Then he pulls this concept of different horses with different colors. And again, God is allowing these things to happen, Bob. He's not stopping. But the first horse, if we identify with the gospel, that kind of idea, and we understand that would be allowed by God, obviously. But the others, we have to understand that this is all going on. It's not like God's being hoodwinked, or Satan has some kind of strength over God. He can actually have this happen. No, God, this stuff's happening. God's allowing it to happen, and there'll be results that come out of that. It's going to be harmful, bad, but also there'll be justice coming up. So you turn back to Revelation now, if you want to, Revelation 6. I just wanted to show you where that was coming from. That's where he's pulling those color images from. So we have the black horse holding scales. So money, the way that they bartered in those days a lot of times, sometimes they used coins, but coins weren't used very much. They didn't have currency like what we do. So, for instance, you use a Hebrew term here, a shekel is actually a weight. So if you had something of value, maybe it's gold, maybe it's precious stones or something, they set a certain value. So much weight of this item will buy this item for you. So many shekels of this item will buy this for you, okay? It wasn't until later, till coins started to have a monetary value that was associated with them, in a sense. That doesn't come around until later, okay? A lot of times, soldiers were paid with salt. So have you ever heard the saying, he's not worth his salt? That's where it comes from. Roman soldiers were paid with salt a lot of times. Salt was a very valuable, expensive commodity. Salt preserved food. Salt could clean wounds. Salt adds flavoring to your food. And salt in those days lost its saltiness. That's why Jesus says when salt loses its saltiness, it's not any good. It didn't maintain. It wasn't pure like what we have. So salt was something also. So they bartered a lot of times. So this guy's selling scales. What would you use scales for? Well, if you have something here, you say, I need so much, it's going to cost this much, or you need this much weight of something, you use the scales to measure it out. So we see some kind of economic hardship going on here. Not only that, he talks about barley instead of wheat. Barley is not as nutritious as wheat. And he says something about so much, it'll cost so much for barley and so much for this. Don't harm the oil and the wine. Oil was an expensive commodity that most people weren't getting, especially Christians. Christians were poor people. And so it's probably talking about some kind of economic hardship that they're going to be going through also, which is like if you're being persecuted, then people also are not going to sell you things. Or if they do, they're going to sell you something that nobody wants, like barley. Nobody wants barley. It takes a lot more of the product of barley to make enough food to feed a person than it does wheat. It's not as nutritious. So there's going to be some kind of economic hardship, famine, that kind of idea that's going to go on. The next horse is a pale horse, pale green, light green. This is the only rider that's named. The only one. It's named Death. The text also tells us that Hades follows this rider. And these two, Death and Hades, now I don't know how Hades can follow someone, but don't try to pick apart the image. Just try to see the image as it is. These two are allowed to kill with the sword, going back to rider number 2, killing with the sword, famine, going back to the black horse, plague, and wild beasts. So in a sense, this last rider is a culmination of the second and third rider. Because we have this violence and we have famine also associated with this person. But it's interesting is that this rider is limited by God. If you look in the text, look at verse, chapter 6, verse 8. So it says, the rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind. They were given power over a fourth. So they're limited in what they can do. A fourth. When we get to the trumpets, they'll be given authority over a third. Well, a third is a greater amount than a fourth. So like I was talking about, it intensifies to do all these harmful things. So I would propose to you that the rider on the white horse is talking about the gospel going out. It will not be stopped, even though all these horrible things are going on. Red horse is persecution. Persecution not only from violence, but later on there'll be people who will persecute Christians and not want to barter and market with them and have commerce with them. That'll affect them also. Not only that, there's going to be death and stuff that's going to happen from all this stuff. So it's basically just saying that this is what's going to happen as far as persecution. There's going to be a lot of horrible, horrible things going on. And we go to the 5th seal, and we start to see an altar. And the Christians, the souls of those who have died, are under the altar. So the effect of these horses, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. In the 5th, we see the aftermath. That these souls are under this altar. Let me see the next one. Not only that, the martyrs are given white robes. Purity, remember, they're pure. They've been slain because of their testimony. They remain faithful to God. Even though all this horrible stuff is going on, they didn't give up. They didn't recant. They stayed true. They're given the white robes, purity. It also has the concept of victory. But the odd thing is that they ask for justice, and God says it's going to have to wait for a little bit. It's going to have to wait till more are killed.
That's a disturbing line there for me.
Yeah, it is
The end of
disturbing.
time is not going to come until there's been enough martyrs.
Well, yeah, I don't necessarily think that we should look at it as like a step-by-step process that's going to actually play out this way. I think if we step back and look at it from a big picture, you just see persecution going on. Christians are being affected by it. How are they supposed to respond to this? Well, God wants them to stay true, obviously, and not recant their faith. So it would be important for them to know that if they die, they go to be with God. I don't think God has like, well, as soon as a certain number's killed, then it's going to be all over. They're probably thinking like, if you put yourself into their situation, if it was really, really going on, and your wife died because of her faith, and you're asking God for justice, and you're saying, why isn't God answering my prayers? Why isn't God answering my prayers? Well, an answer may be that it's being delayed for some certain reason, and, somebody might come along and say, well, there has to be a full number before this actually happens. So it may be in response to people wanting God's justice and it not happening. Some sort of an explanation. We try not to pick it apart, because if we do, we're going to lose the big picture. Just try to keep the picture of persecution, asking for God's justice. It does happen. And then the cycle repeats itself. So, do I think the end of the world is going to happen like this? No. There are people that are undergoing difficult times in Revelation. John's talking to them. He's teaching them. He's encouraging them. There are actually people in the world today who are probably undergoing a type of revelation persecution. They might be in Africa. They might be in Malaysia, where there's Christians are persecuted severely. They might be in China, even though persecution, I think, has died down there some. Maybe in Russia back in the 70s and 80s that are undergoing these traumatic experiences. And Revelation would be encouraging them in the fact that even though these horrible things are going on, if they stay true to God, they go to be with God.
So instead of interpreting that to mean that God has this exact number, and when the last one is killed, time's going to end, it should be understood to mean there are going to be more.
Yeah, probably. And like I was trying to convey, and I probably didn't convey it very well, is if you had a loved one that died, you'd be wondering, when is that justice going to happen? And so your answer would be like, well, there must be more of it has to happen before. But it will happen. God says it's going to happen. And you're saying, I want it to happen now. Why doesn't it happen now? Well, and it's not like God wants people to die.
Wasn't this written though for the Christians at that time?
Yeah.
Not for us?
Well,
To apply it for us today?
Yeah, it sets within a historical time frame. There's something going on at that time. But the message could be pertinent for people who are undergoing something similar. Christians being killed by Muslims who were saying, Muslims are coming in and say, if you don't convert to the Muslim faith, we're going to kill your children before your eyes.
But those people at that time really knew, they were probably really persecution.
Yeah,
they could really understand what's being said here. Right.
They probably had a better idea than what we do, but
Right.
the symbolism still would have been there. Because the symbolism in of itself is to provide encouragement, and it's to provide pictures for the people to help them to remain faithful. And if you were reading this to someone who could not read, and they're trying to take this information in, it probably has a very powerful means to convey an important message in that you use these colorful, vivid images. These are word pictures.
I find it also interesting that as Jesus, God is revealing this picture in heaven that John gets to see in this vision. He uses imagery that John would understand because he is a student of the Old Testament, and that people who read this in that day would identify also
Right.
what is in the Old Testament.
Right. We have the Old Testament symbols carried forward. They're not necessarily the same, but he's using that as a vehicle to move his message along. So we'll see destruction language coming out that comes straight out of the Old Testament. And it's pretty, similar. But like the horses, it comes from Zechariah, but Zechariah is talking about something different. But he uses this image of God using these horses, it's chariots in Zechariah, using these horses to go out and do this purpose. And then John uses the same image to talk about these horses that go out and do things. And not necessarily that God's behind it, but God allows some of these things to happen. It's going to repeat itself. So the cycle repeats. And it's probably not clicking. When we start to go through these certain trumpets and bowls a little bit more, and you start to think about this, I kind of hope you start to see this. But it's not necessarily talking about how things are going to happen. Things are going on. They're going through persecution. They're asking for God's justice. They're wondering when it's going to happen. And God says it is going to happen, and judgment will come. So he's just presenting this cycling image. It's going to change. The trumpets are going to be a different type of, using different word pictures. But they're going to convey the same kind of ideas. Persecution, pleading for God's justice, God's intervention. So it's just going to continually repeat itself. So, as Bob was saying earlier, a lot of this information in Revelation has happened, except for the very end. Obviously, we haven't went to the final judgment yet, so that's still to come. Obviously, the new heaven and new earth has not happened yet. That's still to come. Those events are still coming. We haven't experienced that yet. They are coming. There will be an end. There will be a recreation of this creation. And God will come, will live with his people once again in a more profound way than is going on now. But a lot of these events have transpired. So that doesn't mean this kind of stuff can't start up again. Talk to Christians in Africa. Talk to Christians in other places that are going through persecution. It's happening. Any more questions? We can stop. We'll stop right there. That's a good stopping spot. So try not to, like I said, I know we want to get in there and just pick apart everything and really try to find every detail, but try to step back and look at the big picture and see where it's going. And as you continue reading, you'll start to see, I hope, this repetitive idea start happening again. When we go through the rest of the seals, we talk about the judgment coming up. I think it'll be easier for you as you go on, because we're going to start talking about thunder and lightning and earthquakes, those kind of ideas, presence of God happening, heaven being open, and that image, those images will come back and be conveyed again at the end of like the trumpets and the bowls. You start to see that judgment talk again. Okay. Are you overwhelmed?
It would have been a lot easier if it could have just been, do this and this and this and this. Instead of all of the symbols, all of that.
This type of writing was common for them. So it would, if Rome is your target, and you're talking about Rome in a derogatory manner, and you're going through persecution, you might want to use symbolic language so they don't know that you're talking about them. It's meant to encourage Christians, okay? And that's the whole point. Now, what's going on in the United States and what's going on with some Christians it's going to talk about some other stuff later on. It's going to start, it doesn't come out and completely say it, but we do see the power of seduction. And to tell you the truth, persecution might be the easiest one to go through than seduction, because seduction seems to be, it fools people very easily. And you might think that you're all right with God and not understand that other things have crept into your life that you have justified or something else. And that may pull you from God. Whereas the persecution, if you're being persecuted for your faith and they're beating on you, you probably pretty well know where you stand with God. You wouldn't be there if you weren't being faithful to God. So. But that doesn't come up till later. That doesn't really start showing up till 18. It's not as pronounced as the persecution, so we'll just have to look and see what's going on there.
I feel like the more I learn, the less I know.
You and me both. So why do we even bother? No, it's hard. It is hard. So. Okay, well, keep those papers. We'll go through them next time. And if you have any questions, you have my email or phone number. I gave them out first. So if you have anything, you can call me or email me. Or just bring them next week. We'll keep on plugging along. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you.